Hi everyone, so I got into the tabletop role-playing games around the age of 12. I met a new friend and he was already into them. He tried and failed to describe to me games without boards and playing pieces. But once I actually played one, you know what? I fully got it. And this makes perfect sense, as it was another way to create and experience stories, right? It was a facet of my fascination with TV shows and reading, and it was just an extension of that. The interesting thing about my so-called decade is my relationship with tabletop games has been difficult. In 2000, Wizards of the Coast released the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's that event that brought the 4 people who form the core of our current tabletop role-playing game group together. For this story to make sense, you're going to have to go back further and then loop back around to this pivotal moment. Sometime in 1995 or 1996, I split from my gaming group and friend group. It was when the inevitable happened, and the woman who would become to be my wife for 20 years became an item. And in that process, I sacrificed that friend group in order to pursue that relationship. As a result, my life as an active tabletop gamer ceased, the primary person running games. It came to an end, completely stopped, and I became a thing which was a very 90s and early 2000s thing, I believe, and may well still be, an armchair gamer. This period had numerous facets to it. I bought lots of games, but just read them. In fact, the period of time that I bought most role-playing games and consumed most role-playing games was when I was not actually playing any of them. I became involved in the Indian story games movement, which discussed the wide and conscious intent of gaming rather than just accepting what was the orthodoxy at the time. From a certain point of view, I was deeper into gaming during this period, despite not actually playing. I also learned a lot about why games worked and the types of games I liked and how to communicate that and frame it. Why I was in exile and an armchair gamer is a bit of a mystery. There was no need for it, but for decisions and a lack of effort on my part. My wife was certainly not stopping me seeking out a new group if I'd been predisposed to do it. It was almost 5 years later when a gaming group in Newcastle was proposed, and out of that spawned the nucleus of the current gaming group. Myself, another individual, and 3 others who were part of a larger network of gamers in Newcastle. Where does the release of the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons come into this? Well, it was a catalyst. One of the challenges was people in that larger extended group who still advocated wanting to game, but in truth had it so low on their priorities, they never actually got round to it. The 3rd edition's release was a catalyst because we put it out there that we were forming a new group with no actual ties to any pre-existing networks or social standing, and the only, shall we say, criteria for entry was you should be able to commit to playing every other week. And that formed the current gaming group at the start of the millennium. A core of 4 remain as one has moved away. The last decade of tabletop role-playing represents a dichotomy between playing and running games for me. In terms of playing, the decade has been an absolute success. Well, since the millennium. Yeah, when you look at it, we could have played more campaigns, I guess. We tend to have quite a low rate of campaign play, even though we keep our campaigns relatively short, largely because we often find the summers a wipeout. And there were games I missed due to issues in my life. We've discussed them already, right? My period of unemployment, the divorce. You get it if you've watched this series. But the period with this gaming group, if not all in this decade, has been defined by playing in the best games I've ever played in. The majority of tabletop role players look back at a vague, rose-tinted memory sort of period, obscured by 80s dry ice fog. That for them represents some sort of glorious period of playing for days on end with their teenage mates. And I have those experiences too, doing crazy things like playing for 24 hours straight, but they're not my best period in gaming. And I have to admit, if that was true, I would be pretty sad and depressing. The best gaming I've had as a player is 100% in the last 20 years as a professional adult in my 30s and 40s. The interesting story for this so-called decade is my relationship with running games, as since returning to active status at the turn of the millennium, it's been broken for a few reasons. First, I think my period of time as an armchair gamer had some negatives as well as positives. The knowledge it has given me about the why and how of tabletop gaming is by and large invaluable, but it did also turn my hobby into something I did without really thinking about it much, into something that maybe had a bit too much intentional thought. For a long period of time, I think this broke my ability to run games. Intentional thought is good. Regular watchers of this channel know I have no problem with that, but letting it become a barrier is bad. Second, when I came out of the funk, I'll have to admit I think the group dynamics were wrong. The culmination of this was I ran a space opera game in the first half of the decade that imploded. Well, it didn't actually implode, that's a bit dramatic. It's more that it sort of politely spluttered out like a flame deprived of oxygen. And the strange thing is, there are more similarities than differences in terms of how that game was run compared to the current one in terms of how I planned it, delivered it, and its scope and tone. They have a lot of core similarities really. The result of these two dynamics has been a handful of games that got to character creation or a session before going no further. This has all meant if you throw in the chaos around delusions of migrating to Australia, albeit that was pre-2010, the time dedicated to the MBA, a period of unemployment and recovering from the divorce, I didn't actually get back into the swing of running role-playing games until 2019, and in the form of the one I'm running now. And I have to say, as a combined effort between everyone at the table, it's pretty bloody awesome. It's gone way beyond how I could have expected it. And as people know, I set my expectations pretty damn high. It is easily the best thing I've run. It's a thing of beauty in terms of the type of story being told, the balance between the intentional story while allowing for a high degree of player input. In fact, that's been one of the key things of this campaign, how a GM intended story and radical player input is not a dichotomy and a binary choice. It's also literally the most comfortable I've felt running a game since I entered the hobby. And hopefully my need to state that here for the purposes of the narrative has not jinxed this endeavour in 2020. This has all reinforced that tabletop role-playing games remain an essential part of my life. When they are absent, my life just feels a whole lot more, well, banal and hollow. This is because they are one of the primary ways I engage with stories in a more creative way. And I get it. Some people might say it's a distraction from doing something bolder, like actually writing fiction. And there was a time I used to think that. But as the current campaign plays out, it reinforces the view that that's actually not the case. They're related but separate. The unique nature of tabletop role-playing games being stories written in the moment across 5 imaginative individuals is something unique and in and of itself, and life is always less interesting without that experience in it. Until the next chapter, you can support me by doing a few simple things. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, certainly post a comment, and let's continue to make small great changes to make life a story worth telling.